Hi friends! Welcome to Hopeful Monster Studios YouTube channel. Today we are going to be working on making a little stuffed monster friend. This is a Snibble and he's actually got a cousin called a Tibble. Snibbles and Tibbles are very similar. They've both got long, shaggy, brightly colored fur, little grumpy, fanged faces. The only real difference is Snibbles have short fleece in the front of their ears, and Tibbles are just long, shaggy friends. They've got long fur tufts at the top of their head. They are cuddly, they're lovable, they make great companions or gifts for friends who maybe need a little bit more brightness and a few more smiles in their day. So let's get started. We've got a whole bunch of different pieces that are cut out in your kit. I will instruct you from start to finish on how to assemble your Snibble or Tibble. It's going to be a challenge, but I think we're going to have fun. Just remember, a little bit of patience, a little bit of determination, and you can do this. Let's get started. All right, so let's get started. We have all of our pieces laid out and all of our tools, so I'm going to run you through these really quick, and then we'll get started putting together our little monster plushie. So first off is the pattern pieces themselves. We've got 2 ear backs, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 tail, a front and a back of the body. The front of the body is short pile fur to make it easier to sew on the faceplate, and the back of the body for this particular monster is this beautiful long pile rainbow. So they'll have a shaggy back and a slightly less fluffy front. We have our needle and thread. We have scissors. We have a pair of hemostats, which are locking. They're great for when you're trying to flip pieces of the pattern right side out. We have our fabric clips, which help us hold pieces of fabric together while we're sewing. And then we have the front of the ears, which is more fleece. So they are cut to match the backings. I also have a little metal dowel. With the monster kits, you will have a chopstick to help you flip things inside out. So, oh, almost forgot. If we want our monster to be soft and squishy and huggable, we want polyfill stuffing. So a little baggie of that will also come included in all of the kits. So you will have a little spool of thread, a needle, some of the clips, all of the pattern pieces, and the stuffing when you order your kit online or you do one of the panels at a convention. All right, we are ready to get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is get little bits of fuzz out of the way and prep my needle. Now, what I like to do is I like to unspool enough thread to be roughly from my fingertip to my shoulder. This is a little bit longer than that, but that's fine. The first thing you're going to do with your thread, once it's threaded into your needle, is to tie a knot in the end. So you've got your, there we go, you can see it better against the pink background. You will have your 2 pieces of thread, and you're just going to tie a simple knot. And then I like to do a second time, just that you have a knot that's large enough that it's going to get stuck on the other side of the fabric and hold really well. I will snip the excess thread off. And now that's prepped to start sewing. Now the first thing we're going to do And the pieces for this video are numbered. You will have an instruction sheet in your kit as well that will show you what the different pieces are number-wise and give you basic steps. This video is for people who have a little bit easier time with visual instructions and find it a little bit easier to follow along. So, your ear pieces for the back and for the front are number 1. Your 2 arms are number 2. Your 2 legs are number 3. Your tail is number 4, and your front and back of the body is number 5. Technically, the faceplate is 6, but that is the absolute last thing that we put on. So, let's get started with the ears. Now, we could put them together just like this and sew them, but then you would see the stitches all along the edge. Same with the arms and the legs. So the way to make them all nice and tidy is to put them face to face with the fur inside of the pieces that you are attempting to sew together. So I tuck the tip of the ear fur down, and I'll put a clip, and then I'm going to do the same on the sides. The reason you do this is so that the fur does not get caught in the seam, and then when you flip it right side out and brush it out, it looks nice and fluffy and nothing caught along the edges, and it makes for generally all around a cleaner look on your plush. So just take your time. And get your clips in place. So now you have a piece, kind of like a little plushy sandwich, that's ready to sew. What you are going to do is take your needle and your thread. You are going to start at the bottom, and we're going to do what's called a whip stitch, which is a very simple basic stitch up to the top of the ear and then back down to the bottom. Once we get to the bottom, we are going to tie it off with a knot to hold the pieces together and make sure that when we go to flip them, none of the stitches start coming out and that the piece stays sandwiched together firmly. So I like to move my clip up a little bit, and a whip stitch is literally just going through one end, out the other, and around. So you're basically doing a spiral, like a spiral note. And I'll show you what I mean. Going to pull our needle taut so that it's flush up against the fabric. And then we're going to go back in that fleece and back out of the fur. So there is your first stitch. You are going to continue doing this all the way up one side and down the other. Mind your fingers, don't poke yourself with your needle, that's unpleasant. We want love to go in these little plushy monsters, not blood, sweat, and tears. And this is essentially what the side of your piece is going to look like. It's going to be just these little stitches that are holding everything in place. As you sew upwards and you get to one clip, you can remove it and continue sewing. You want to go close to the edge of your fabric, but far enough inward that the stitches aren't going to tear out when you go to flip it around right side out. I would say maybe 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch into the fabric. So the advantage to hand sewing is we don't have to leave a super wide seam allowance on account of it being hand sewing instead of a machine. So that's what that's looking like. I'm going to finish sewing this, and then we are going to address knotting the end, and then we'll do the other ear. So go ahead and pause the video and sew up your first ear and your second ear. Okay, so now we've gone up one side and down the other. We are at the edge of our fabric. So now we are going to tie off our thread. You're going to poke it through both sets of fabric as though you were going to make another regular stitch, and then the thread that is not connected to your needle, you're going to loop around your needle twice. So 1, 2, and then you are going to carefully pull your needle through, tug, 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 and now you've got a knot to hold the thread in place. You're going to snip off the excess, put your ear aside, and then prepare to do your second ear. So I'm going to knot my thread again. 1, 2, and I'm going to clip the front of the ear and the back of the ear together. All right, so everything's clipped together. The fur is tucked in neatly. You're going to do the same thing with this ear that you did with the other one. So up one end, down the other, and then do that knot at the end to secure the thread in place and to hold the two pieces together. So go ahead and sew your second ear, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now again, we're at the end, so we're going to put that knot in the thread. 1, 2, and pull. Tug to make sure that's nice and snug and tight against the fabric, and then snip your thread. And so now we're going to put our thread somewhere where we're not going to lose our needle. Now you have 2 ears that are fleecy on one side and the fur backing on the other. Well, now what do you do with them? Now you need to turn them right side out because now they're inside out. So I find the easiest way to do this is to fold down the fabric and kind of push the rest of it in. And then you would take your chopstick or the back end of a paintbrush or little wooden dowel or metal dowel and push so that you are turning your ear right side out. And you'll know you got to the end of it when you brush the fluff away. There. And it doesn't go any further. So there is ear number 1. Now, isn't that going to look cute? You'll do the same thing to ear number 2. Fold the fabric down, push in, and then use whichever tool you prefer to push the ear right side out. And there we go. What's also helpful in projects like these, if you have a brush, a small brush, whether that's a regular hairbrush or a really good tool when working on furry plushies, is the pet slicker brushes that you would use for your dog or cat. You can run those alongside the furry portions and it'll help untangle any fibers that got knotted up while they were folded inside out or during the course of you flipping the items. So we've got our ears. Let's put those off to the side. And the next piece is number 2. Now, I am not going to have enough thread to sew this entire piece, but that's all right, because that just gives me a chance to show you how to do a thread change. So I'm going to go ahead and prep our thread. And I'm going to take the arm pieces and use our clips. Same as with the ears, you're going to want to tuck the fur inside and fold it so that this backing is facing out and the fur is all tucked inside. And really the clips are nice because they hold things in place like a tiny little clothespin. So instead of using straight pins, that if you're like me, you inevitably tend to poke yourself in the fingers with, they are a little bit more accident proof. So I'm going to put my clips all together and take my thread, what's left of it, and I'm going to start at the top just because it tends to be easier. You want to go in the direction where the fur is going to be coming out, which in this case, you're pushing the fur down back that way. So I'm going to go ahead and start this up. I'm not going to get very far, but that's okay because swapping thread out is easy and there's no sense in wasting it, right? All right, so when you get to about a finger length of thread left, if you realize that you're not going to have enough to complete your piece, you're going to want to tie it off. So I say leave a finger length because that gives you the chance to do this. And just like we do when we are tying thread off for the end of a piece, well, you've got just a little bit of needle sticking out, you're going to go very carefully. 1, and 2, and you're going to pull that through. Tug to make sure it's tight. And then what I personally like to do, just to give an extra little bit of safety, is I will cut the thread so that it's 2 separate pieces, and I'll knot it here once or twice. 1, 2, I'm going to do 3. There we go. That just kind of reinforces the knot and makes it less likely to come undone over time. I'm going to snip the extra, and then we are sewn up to here. So that means I'm going to thread another length of thread on my needle. So again, stretching out once, twice, and that essentially gives me the length of my arm, which I find is a good length for sewing. It's not too long so as to be unwieldy, but it's not too short, so I'm not having to swap in and rethread my needle a million times in the course of sewing one piece. So you're going to tie your knot. You're going to tie it again. You're going to snip off the excess. And then we just continue. And what I like to do when I am splicing in a new bit of thread, kind of mid stitch in the piece, is I will actually thread it through kind of right overlapping where my last stitch was. And I'll do 1 or 2 stitches right there, and then I will continue on just like normal. And if your thread gets hooked up on your clips, don't panic. Just pause a moment, untangle it, and continue on. And we're at the end of our piece. So again, we're going to thread through as though we were doing another stitch. Loop once, loop twice, pull it through, and make sure it's good and tight. Snip your edge. and then re-knot your thread for the next piece. So again, we're going to do the same thing with this piece that we did with the first arm. And there's our second. So now we have both of our arms all stitched up, and we put our knots at the end to keep them nice and closed. I'm going to fold them down to get them started. And you just kind of inch the fabric down. Once you get it started, you can use your chopstick, or if you've got access to a pair of hemostats like this, we can lock them closed and then use that to flip them right side right. Just go gently so you're not tearing your seam or ripping your fabric. You just kind of, there we go. And there is arm number one. You just kind of brush the fur down. Now, what I like to do that you don't have to do, but I personally find it makes life a little bit easier, is I will either trim with scissors, or if you have access at home to a pet shaver, I clip just the first maybe ½ inch or so of the pieces, and you can see that I did it on these, just because when you are sewing them to the rest of the body, it tends to make it a little bit easier. You're not trying to find your way through all the really long fluff. It's absolutely not necessary, but I do find that it's a wee bit helpful. So we are going to do the same thing with this one, and sometimes it can help if you fold it in half. It makes it easier for the piece to kind of work its way through. Because of the style of these monsters, they have kind of fatter paws and feet than they do arms and legs. It gives them a really cute aesthetic, but it does mean that you're working a teensy bit harder when it comes time to flip them right side out, because the paws and the feet are wider than the wrists and, well, not wrists, I guess shoulders and upper thigh portion where they are attached to the main body. And I'll just kind of poke that to make sure it's fully flipped. And what I'll do before we start sewing them to the body is grab my brush, and we'll give these just a nice brush out to make them neat and tidy. But that's it. We've got our arms all set. So now we are going to do essentially the same thing for both of the legs, both of your part number 3s. We're going to do the same thing for the tail, part 4. And again, fold it in half, and you are going to tuck, tuck, tuck those fur fibers so that they are pushed into the center, and it keeps them out of your way, and it makes it easier to sew a nice clean seam without the fur getting caught. And you do that all the way down, and you do the same with each of your legs. So that will be our next step, and once I get those clipped, we will sew them up, we will knot our ends, and then we'll move on from there. So go ahead and do that, and then come back to the video. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, now we are done. We have sewn together both part 3s, our legs, and part 4, our tail. These you are going to flip just like you have been. You fold down the edge, and then you start working your way down using either a pair of hemostats if you have them, or your chopstick to kind of scoot things along. The tail is functionally the same. It's obviously narrower and a little bit more difficult, but just go slowly, little bit at a time, and you can even just sort of walk it down. So do that until all three of these parts are flipped right side out so that the fur is on the outside, and then we'll be right back. Gosh, you don't want to watch me do this all over again, do you? Doing all the flipping and nah, that takes too long. Let's just use some editing magic, right? 1, 2, 3, and there we go. Ta-da! Wasn't that easy? All right, so this is the point where I am going to recommend, pardon all the faux fur fibers in it, either a pet slicker brush or a regular hairbrush or a comb, something. Just because when we are assembling our monster, it's easier if your fur fibers are tidy. So what we're going to do, this is why I like the pet slicker brushes. You can get them at your local dollar store, you can get them online, you can get them at a pet store, although you'll probably pay more. And you just give it a quick little brush, and then those fibers are all nice and smooth going in the correct direction. They're going to stay out of your way better when you are trying to assemble your monster. So we're going to do that with the rest of these. And let's edit that again. Ta-da! There we go. Now everyone looks nice and tidy. Actually, let's do our ears. Almost forgot about them. And everyone is ready to be attached to the body, but our body is still in multiple pieces, and that won't do. So what I'm going to recommend is we have our front panel number 5, we have our back panel number 5, and we have our unnumbered little faceplate. Now you can either put your body together, finish off your monster, and then sew this on last. As long as you don't overstuff the face, it is actually a little bit easier to sew the face on first while it's flat, because it's easier to do your whip stitch around the edges. If you want a really fat, pudgy monster, you're going to want to attach the faceplate last, because as you stuff it, you will strain the stitches, and the monster face can kind of warp and buckle and look a little bit weird. We're not going to make a super chunky monster, though, so it shouldn't be a problem. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to attach his face before we sew him all together. So what you're going to want to do first is move your other parts out of the way. And then you kind of want to eyeball him. Again, brushing the fibers just makes life a little bit easier. And I'm going to put him kind of right in the center there. Now, to hold him in place while you are stitching, you can use your little clips. And I find clipping the top and the bottom does a good job of tacking it in place while still giving me plenty of room to stitch around the edges. So how we're going to handle this is make sure you have a nice double knotted end to your thread. You're going to pass it through the back of the fur front and the fleece. Whoop. And then you're going to go maybe 1/8 of an inch and pass it right back through. And instead of a whip stitch, this is called a running stitch. So you can see that it's fairly close to the edge, but not right alongside the edge. You've got that little bit of space where we're going to go all the way around the edge. And actually, let's be super secure. And we'll clip our face at the 4 corners to hold it in place. So you're just going to continue to go in and out of the fabric right alongside the edge, and make sure that your stitches are pulled taut on the other side. back down. And if you do nice, neat, tidy little stitches, you can take that top one out now because he's held in place. It'll just be little tiny bumps along the edge that hold the face in place so that once you stuff your monster, his face is securely attached. So go ahead and attach your faceplate, or if you would rather wait until the end, that's fine too. You can, no, I don't want you to have to skip the video. Let's do the magic again. And there we go. Faceplate all stitched on. And now it'll be ready for when you put the two halves of the bodies together and stitch it closed and get the stuffing in there. So fleece thankfully stretches pretty well, as does the faux fur. So, and you don't stuff the head or the body like super tightly stuffed. You kind of want to loosely stuff them enough so that it'll puff out the body and the face and round them out a little bit, but the fleece flexes with it. And if you find that you have some of the fur fibers kind of caught under the fleece, you can just use your scissors or chopstick or a needle and just sort of fidget with it, pluck, and get those fibers out from under the fleece so that it sort of fluffs up around the face. I got a little spot there that I don't like. Hold on. I mean, you don't have to get super picky about it, but you know, it just helps the face look a little bit more finished and more clean by the time you're done. Do do do. Just getting the little bits around the edges. There you go. Give it a little quick brush. And there. So now we have the faceplate attached. And we are on to our next steps. We have all of our pieces together. We've got our faceplate sewn on. If you find that there's only a little bit of thread left, you can go ahead and rethread your needle with a little bit more thread, longer piece, because the next step that you're going to be taking is to just, you want to clip your front and your back of your body together with the backing of the fur facing out. So you want all of your fluff, your pile, pointing inwards, because then when you sew up the edges, everything will look nice and clean when you flip it right side out. So you kind of find your center point there and clip. There we go. Now you are going to kind of place your ears on the inside. I'll go over in a second about using registration marks so that you have them kind of even on both sides, but you want to look too at what side your faceplate is on, because obviously if you're doing a snibble, the fleece should be pointing forward to match up with the fleece faceplate. So I'm just going to kind of give a little brush here. There's also a trick you can do, which is, I'll show you in a second, kind of trimming the fur fibers closest to where they're going to be stitched into the seam. So it's not shaving them, but just kind of making your life a little bit easier so that you're not having to sew through all of that fur fluff. You're already having to do that with the front and the back of the body. So I personally find that if you go and just like that, I don't know, 1/4 inch or so on the bottom, trim it a tiny little bit. Just right along there. And again, don't drive yourself crazy. Just, you know, if you have a sharp pair of scissors, and just kind of tidy it up along the edges there. Yeah. And what that's going to do is that's going to clean up that edge so that as you are sewing it into the body, just last more a little bit, it will make things easier when you're pulling the needle and thread through all of those layers of fabric. There we go. And you're not even going to notice it once everything is put together. You're going to do the same thing to the second ear, and then we will get it set up for exactly where we're going to put them inside the body, so that when we stitch it, we will stitch them right to the top of the head. But essentially do the same thing with the second ear that we did with the first, just like I said, that bottom little like 1/4 inch. Snip the fibers a little bit shorter, closer to the backing. And it's just one more step that's going to help make your life a little bit easier when you're trying to put everything together. It's the little things, you know, make life easier and make the project go a little bit more seamlessly. And there we go. Now we have both of our ears nice and neatly trimmed so they'll fit into the seam without any kind of issue. We've got all of our limbs sewn up and brushed out nice and tidy. And we have our main body clipped at the top right in just about dead center. So this would be a good point to grab a marker or pen or some sort of writing utensil that you can write on fabric with, because now you are going to want to set up your spacing. So, for example, I want my ears right about there. So I'll make just tiny little registration marks so that it helps me line everything up when I'm clipping it together. And as long as we've got the pin out at the same time, we can do the same for our legs. So we take our fluffy little monster legs and we need to leave a spot at least about let's find out. A little over an inch, about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, somewhere in that general vicinity. Because this is where we're going to, once we're sewing everything closed, leave open. Because this is the spot that we're going to turn everything right side out. Now that doesn't look like a very big opening for all of this to be flipped through, but the thing to keep in mind is that the fur is soft and squishy and it collapses and can get smushed. And there's a trick with the legs. So once we get to that point, I will show you. But for the moment, I'll make my little registration marks. And those just help me line everything up as I am clipping the body and kind of clipping the pieces in place so that you don't end up with one leg that goes kind of sideways and one leg that goes straight. So those are going to be right there. And you can see it comes down nicely and then the legs kind of sploot out a little bit, but they are relatively equal distant and there is enough space in the center for us to be able to flip our monster right side out. So let us first take care of clipping these ears in place. The thing to remember is because you are flipping the body inside out, is you want the fleece portion of the ears, if you are doing one of the fleece monsters, to be facing front. If you are doing all fluffy ears, this is a little less important because the ears will look the same regardless of which side shows. But for the fleece ears, this is the front of our monster. So we want the fleece to be facing the way the front of the face is going to be. So what we're going to do is we are going to very carefully using our registration marks, lift the monster ear up, and you see if I put it like this, the fleece is facing in the same direction as the little fleece face panel. So we're going to carefully slide the ear in and brushing our fur down. Getting these parts clipped into place is honestly the trickiest part. Once everything's clipped into place and you're sewing, it's not so bad. But getting them lined up is a little bit tricky. So what you want is for the backing of the fur and the fleece to be kind of right at the same line where the edge of the body is. Because what's going to happen is when you're sewing, you're going to kind of catch the ear in the same stitches. So for example, tuck that in. We're going to grab one of our clips and we're going to adjust so that the edge of that is right by our registration mark. Then I'm going to clip the ear in place so that it lines up right along the edge of the head. And once that first clip is in place, it's a little bit easier. You just kind of follow the line of the head, and I like to do one side and then the other. And if the ears are overlapping and poking out of the head a little bit, that's fine too. It just means that they're going to be anchored in there really well and they're not going to go anywhere. Oh no, let go. Okay. So we're going to put clip there. And just like the other pieces, we're going to tuck our fur inward so that once we get past the ear, that's clipped nice and neat. So you see how all of that pretty much lines up with the edge of the head. You are then going to do the exact same thing on this side, where we want the fleece to be pointing forward with the face. So we look for our registration mark. We disregard the random fluff. Come on. There we go. Working with fur fabrics, faux fur fabrics, is a little bit trickier. If this were all fleece, it would be super duper easy. But the fur requires a little bit more particular handling, just because those fibers are long and they kind of get in the way, and it becomes a little bit more effort to work around them. But the end result is really cute, and I think the fluffy monsters are adorable, so I think it's worth the effort. Once you have your ear in place, right by your registration mark, you're going to take another clip and clip it in place. I'm going to do one more. And there we go. Now it looks like your monster's wearing a weird little clip crown. So what we could do, if you have more clips, if you have them at home, or if you have sewing pins, you can pin this entire thing all the way to your leg registration marks. I don't have that many clips with me, and there aren't quite so many in the kit. So what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing, and as we sew past those areas or sew up to those areas, we'll take them off and we'll move them down. And you just start moving your clips down until you get to the leg registration mark. And we'll do one side and then we'll do the other. All right, so I'll show you what I mean. I think I'm right-handed. We're going to start on the right and we're going to work our way all the way across. And then as we're moving the clips, we're going to move them down the body until we get to this registration mark, and then we are going to knot off the thread like we've done before. We're going to rethread the needle and then sew this portion. Once you have sewn all of this completely closed up into your first leg registration marks, so where the legs are going to be inserted, You're going to tie both of your knots, and then we'll move on to the next step. So go ahead and sew all the way down to that first registration mark on one side. Sew all the way down the first registration mark on the second side, and then come back to the video and we'll keep going. Before I go any further, I almost forgot to mention, if you run out of thread or you look like you're not going to have enough thread to complete the entire seam, don't panic. This is an easy fix, and I'm going to show you how you can swap out with a new piece of thread. So I've got about a finger length left. That's not going to be enough to go all the way down the side to that first registration mark. So I'm going to tie this off and swap in a new piece of thread. The way to do that is super easy. You just thread through the fabric, and you're going to loop and tie it off just like you would at the end of a seam. So push your needle just a little bit of the way out, loop this thread around once and twice, pull it through, and you've got a knot. I'm going to do that one more time just to make sure it's really secure. 1, 2, mind your fingers. And there we go. Now that's tied nice and strong. Just to get rid of that edge or the end of the thread, I'm going to thread it through, pull it, and then I'll snip it flush. I'll discard this tiny little piece of thread that definitely wouldn't have been enough to finish that side of the doll. And I'll rethread my needle and continue on. Sometimes your thread won't want to cooperate, sometimes your needle won't want to cooperate, sometimes your fabric won't want to cooperate. Don't stress, don't get down on yourself. Projects like this are supposed to be fun. And it's totally fine to get frustrated, but don't beat yourself up too much. Remember, this is a labor of love. You are making a cute, fuzzy little monster friend, and however they turn out, they're going to be absolutely perfect. So, this is where I ended my last stitch. I'm going to thread my needle kind of right on top of that last stitch, just to overlap a little bit. And then I'm just going to keep going. And now I'll use the rest of this thread to go all the way down to that first registration mark, and you can see the clips aren't on this side anymore. As I sewed up to them, I would remove them and put them further down on the body. So you really only need a few of them. You just keep moving them, and you're able to successfully use them to help you hold your doll pieces together. Let go, gosh darn it. There we go. Okay, now just continue sewing down the sides to your first registration marks, and we'll go from there. Okay, so you have made it all the way across the top, down the head, the neck, and the sides, and you have knotted your thread at your first registration marks. Don't cut the thread off. Knot it like you normally would, but don't snip it. It just saves you a step. Put it off to the side. Now we're going to clip our legs in place, and then with the thread that you have left, you can just keep going. You can at least get one leg knotted into place before you have to cut and rethread. So you're gonna look at your legs. Well, your monster's legs. Well, you could look at your legs too if you want. I'm not your mom, you do you. Be fabulous, be proud of being fabulous. All right, so we're gonna tidy up our little monster's legs. We're gonna look, and you can see how they kind of have a tiny bit of an angle. I like to put the longer side at the first registration mark and the slightly shorter side at the second registration mark, like so. Now, we're going to attach these functionally the same way we did with the ears. It's going to be a tiny bit trickier, I'm not going to lie to you, because these are considerably larger. But good news is that they smush, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Oh, and before we go any further, we do have our arms and legs that need a little bit of polyfill. You're going to have a baggie of polyfill that comes with your kit. So what you want to do is take really not very much, just a small amount, a little puffball of polyfill, and you're going to put it into the leg. And you can use your chopstick or your fingers or your hemostat or whatever you like. But you're going to push that all the way to the end. So you stuff to the end of your little leggy, and you'll feel when you hit the end of the foot. And then it puffs up the end of the leg just a little bit, not a ton, just a bit. Now you could fill them more, but honestly, my advice is do your little bit of stuffing. I mean, maybe if you really want to, you can add just a tiny bit more. You want this to be able to collapse and be smushed into a relatively small space though, because remember, both of these legs are going to have to fit in that lower body. And then you're going to have to flip those legs outside of a fairly small entrance. So your best bet is to add just enough to puff up the legs a little bit, not too much. We don't want him to look like he's doing crazy exercise and going to the gym every day. He's more of a snuggle on the couch kind of monster. There we go. And now I have my two little leggies, and he'll have some nice floppy little legs that are fatter at the bottom than they are at the top. So he's got squishy feet. So now how do we do this? Well, we are functionally going to be flipping them just like we did with the ears. The difference is these are a bit bigger. So I find it easier if I've got the body pointing upwards and I'm feeding the legs down inside. And again, the higher end goes at your first registration mark, the lower end goes at your second. Unless you want them to be kind of splooting out, that's perfectly fine. It's just however you want them to look. But I'm going to smooth the fur as much as I can, and this is the other reason why we sometimes trim around the edge here. And you don't need to fit the leg entirely in the body yet. So what you can do, which will make your life a little bit easier, is you've got your seam, lay that right snug flush up against where the stitches for the body stopped. And you see how I've got that kind of laid out right along the edge, just like we did with the ears. This is going to seem a little daunting. You got this. You can do it. Just requires going slow and being patient. There we go. That's clipped into place. And now I'm going to clip this half of the leg in place. Now, hopeful, you might be saying. His leggy is sticking out of his bottom end. Isn't that going to be a problem? Nope, because we're going to stitch this in place. And once we get to the end of this leg, to this second registration mark, we're going to stuff the leg up in the body and then work on the other one. We're going to do functionally the same thing. This gives us a little bit more room, so we're not fighting trying to cram the leg into the body while we're doing our stitching. So Did I clip the wrong side? I totally did, because my thread's over here. Ha ha. Joke's on me. All right, that's fine. Rather than unclipping the leg, I'm just gonna cut my thread and reknot it. See, this is why it's important to pay attention to what you're doing. But it's also why it's important to not freak out if you make a mistake. Mistakes are just you learning something new and going, oh, okay, well, I know to do this differently for next time. So it's all cool. It'll work out. Now, I would suggest just because the legs are going to undergo some stress when we're flipping in and out, make sure that your stitches are pretty close together for the legs and for the ears when you're attaching them. Just because those parts are going to undergo a little bit more stress when you're flipping the monster right side out. So you want lots of nice, neat, tight little stitches to hold them in place so that they're anchored really firmly into the body. And I'm realizing that the registration mark is actually a little bit further than the leg itself. So I am almost at the end of the edge of the leg. I'm going to sew a stitch or two past, and then I'm going to knot this off just like I would at the end of any other seam. Pull it tight, and again, because this area undergoes stress when you're flipping it, I'm gonna do the knot twice. Make sure that's really nice and firm and secure. And then I'm gonna thread it through and cut it. And now that he's anchored in place really well, now you can just kind of and stuff it right into that little pouch there. And now you're going to make sure that your needle is fully threaded and there's a knot at the end. And then we'll clip that second leggy into place. Clean up these little bits of thread and fluff just to keep them out of my way. And just like before, longer end goes here, shorter end goes there. And we're going to line that up. And since I remember I didn't go quite to the edge of the registration mark with these, I'll do the same with this leg so that we're not sticking out at different angles. Actually, I'm going to start it up here. That way they'll be more symmetrical. And sometimes the fur is a little slippery and it's hard to grab a hold of. That's okay. Again, just take your time. Allow yourself some grace. Especially if this is your first sewing project, you are doing fantastic. I am so proud of you. You're sticking with it. You can do this. And I think this time I'm going to cheat. I'm not even going to tuck the leg in. We'll just sew it, and then we have one less leg that we have to flip right side out. Ha ha ha. So looking at this, as a general rule for me, I want to make sure that I have enough thread to sew the length of seam that I want to sew 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's plenty. All right. Because that gives me enough thread to do the seam, and it gives me enough space on the thread to be able to do a good solid knot at the end and to anchor everything in place. If you find slightly shorter thread works for you, that's awesome. I don't tend to go super long on my thread because it becomes a little bit cumbersome to try and keep track of the thread and not have it tangle. Okay, so I'm going to undo this clip, but I'm going to pinch this really tight and hold it together very firmly while I'm sewing the leg in place. So. And again, small seams close together, just to really make the legs solidly anchored so that our little friend is durable. I'm just starting to get on that finger length of thread. Thankfully, I'm only a stitch or two from knotting the end, so I think I'll be okay. I'll tuck the fur a little bit. I will do one, two more stitches. Yeah, and then, just like before, I'm going to put a little bit of the needle up. I'm going to wrap 1, 2, pull it tight. And again, because this is going to be a high stress area when you're flipping, 1, 2. As always, mind your fingers. Pull that tight. Run it through once more. And bada boom. You are now ready to flip your monster, so you get a better idea of what they're going to look like. And since we cheated, we thought smarter, not harder. Since you've got the one leg that's already sticking out, you're going to go very gentle and very cautious. You can use your hands, you can use your chopstick pushing this way. If you've got your hemostats, that's a fantastic way to go about it. Or you could just reach in with your hand and go, oh, I feel the leg. So let's kind of ease that other leg out. And just go slow so you're not yanking on your seams that you worked so hard to sew. Look at that, we've got 2 leggies. Now it looks like some weird sort of Dr. Seuss creature. Well, we want to see that cute little face that you worked so hard to sew on. So we will continue on with flipping him right side out. And again, take your time. There's no rush. It's not a race. And just sort of little by little, kind of inch your way down. I love this rainbow fur. It's so pretty. And it helps if you fold the head in half, because it helps it get through that opening by the legs a little bit easier. And this is, again, a point where you might want to use your chopstick and very gently push. And there we go. There he is, our little monster friend with his leggies and his ears. And see what those registration marks did was help you keep them kind of an even distance from each other. So when he's sitting, we won't have one leg sticking out like this and one leg sticking down. Same with the ears. It helped keep them kind of nicely in the center. And now all we need to do is stuff the body, sew that closed on the bottom where we flipped it, and we will attach our arms and our tail, and then your little friend is done. So I'm going to give him just a quick little brush. See, this is why I like the faux fur. They're so fluffy and super cuddly looking. There we go, bud. You're looking fabulous. So I'm going to discard that tiny little scrap of thread. I'm going to thread my needle once again. And then we're going to feed this little guy because he needs some polyfill. He's looking a little too skinny right now. Generally speaking, you only need a little bit of polyfill for the arms and the legs. The bulk of it is going to go to the head and the body to puff him out because the arms and legs, and really the tail too, are sort of intended to be floppy teddy bear-esque. Another thing you can do, if you have access to them or you purchase them online, and I will have a list of supplies in the video information and where you can find stuff, but for those of us who grew up with Beanie Babies, and those little plastic beans, those little plastic pellets that kind of give them weight. You can also do that in the ends of your arms and legs and tail, and it gives them kind of a little bit of weighted floppiness. That can be really cute. All right, so like I said, the bulk of your stuffing is going to go in the body. So we'll just brush his bum fur out of the way. And you can do this with your hands, you can do this with your hemostat, you can do this however you want, but I take little clumps of the stuffing at a time and use your chopstick or hemostats or your hand or whatever you prefer. And you're going to start with stuffing the head because that's the furthest point away from the opening. And this is why I was mentioning early in the video that you want to stuff the head, but you don't want to overstuff it because then as it rounds out, it stresses your stitches on the faceplate. And fleece is pretty forgiving and it stretches pretty well, but it can buckle and look a little bit awkward if you stuff the head really, really tightly. You can usually eyeball it and get a general idea of, okay, well, that's round enough. And the face is laying nicely. And he looks soft and cuddly. And that is just fine with me. Tiny bit more in his head, and then I'm going to move on to his body. I like to have the head slightly rounded, but I leave most of my stuffing for the tummy, so he's got a cute round little belly. And put a little bit in the neck so that his head doesn't flop over. And then do the rest of this, aside from a little bit for his paws, into his tummy. Actually, while I'm sitting here, I'm going to take those little puffs and I'm going to put those in his hands. That way, I don't end up running out. So trick with the hemostats is clip it, roll it around the hemostats, open it, close it again, and then it kind of clamps it. Gonna make a liar out of me. Kind of clamps it in place, makes it a little more narrow, and you can feed that through into the arm. And then use your chopstick to pack that on down, or if you're using the little plastic pellets, you can put those in there. If you're using the plastic pellets, I would honestly recommend putting them in and then putting a little bit of stuffing after them because it kind of holds them in place. That way they don't rattle around in there and fall out while you're trying to sew the arms onto the body. That can be really frustrating. Oh, so here's a good learning experience. It looks like I may have trimmed my thread a little too close and cut the knot. Oh no, does this mean my entire arm's going to unravel? Nah, we're fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these little ends that are sticking out, we're going to tuck them in, and we're going to thread our needle with a knot at the end through, pull it up, And we're just going to do our whip stitching on the outside. Because this is such a small area, and because this is going to be the section of the arm that essentially gets sewn up into the body, really once it's attached, it's not going to be visible. So I wouldn't do the entire arm like that, but that tiny little section, no big deal. Brush, brush, brush. And once the arm is attached to the body, you're not even really going to see it. So we're going to give this arm a little bit of stuffing. This is why I love these. These are a fantastic tool when you're sewing, especially if you're sewing small things, because flipping them right side out or stuffing tiny portions, sometimes if you're sewing through several thicknesses of fabric and your needle gets stuck, it's very useful to have them because you can grab things with them and pull and not worry about hurting your fingers. So, much like the legs, these have kind of a higher side and a slightly lower side. It's just the nature of the pattern. And so now that they've got a little bit of stuffing in them, now I can stuff the rest of the body and not have to worry about finishing and then going, oh no, I have nothing for my arms. I don't tend to stuff the tails, just me personally. You can if you want to. It will make them stiffer. You can also, again, put those plastic beads or maybe like a tiny little bit of stuffing in the very end of the tail, and it will weight it more. But for this particular doll, I'm just gonna leave it empty as is. So we're gonna move our thread out of the way. And if you have pets, for goodness sake, keep an eye on where your needle is. Actually, best practice, stick it in your spool of thread. That way it's not going anywhere. You don't accidentally drop it on the floor. I have absolutely done that before. And we have multiple cats who love grabbing a little bit of thread and running off with it, which when it is attached to a needle can be absolutely just stressful and nerve-wracking because obviously you don't want anything to happen to your fur kids. So be mindful that you have a sharp metal implement on the end of that thread and treat it accordingly. Use caution and know where it is at all times. So now we're starting to get a nice round little belly. And I think I'm about at the end here. See, and look how cute he's going to look when he's sitting. I like the shape of his face. I like the thickness. It gives a nice rounded appearance. His round little tummy is adorable. He is well fed and well loved. So now we can close this up and then we can move on to attaching the arms and the tail. So I'm going to take my needle and thread. I'm going to go to the very end and tie my double knot. I'm just going to tie a triple knot for this one. And I'm going to brush this lovely soft fur out of my way so I can sew this up without it getting all tangled in the fabric. I'm going to put a tiny little dab more stuffing in just so that I don't end up with the fabric collapsing in this area. And it's nice and rounded out. There we go. Okay, so you're an expert at this point. You've done this before. You have your needle and your thread and a knot at the end. So go in, get to the backing of the fabric. Make sure you're not just sewing through the fluff. And once you feel it, kind of bite into the backing of the fabric, thread through. And this is where you're going to kind of have to use your hand to keep the fur fibers out of your way as you sew. So we're going to sew this little guy closed. We're going to do the same whip stitch that we've been doing, but we're going to go into the backing, pull it up, and you can feel, you'll be able to feel the difference. Whoop, come here, buddy. You'll be able to feel the difference between the backing of the fur and just the fluff. So if you go like this, you should feel your needle catching on the backing, and go ahead and continue doing that until you get to the other end. Tie a knot like you normally would, and then we will move on to the next step. See you in a minute. Okay, we're at the end. So 1, 2, hey, see, now it got caught in the fur fibers, and that's okay. We don't panic. We very carefully. See, this is why working with faux fur can be a little tricky. But usually, if you're able to loosen up your knot, you just kind of take a look at where it went kablooey and go, oh, okay, it's stuck there. So I'm going to backtrack my steps. And there we go. Tiny bit of patience and a little bit of effort, and everything's fine. So we've done our knots. I'm going to feed this through, coming out kind of just shy of his belly button. I'm going to pull this tight so it pulls the knot kind of into the fabric. And then I'm going to slide all the way down and very carefully snip the thread. And then you give your friend a little bit of a brush. Brush, brush, brush. Tidy the little fella up. And ta-da, there's your chubby little friend. Now he's just missing his arms and his tail. Oh no. So, next step is the arms. So I will walk you through the first one and then have you move on to the second one. And then we'll attach his tail and he's all ready. He's done and he'll just need his name or her or they. I would not assume our monster's pronouns. Okay, so we are going to be attaching this slightly differently than the legs and the ears. Got a random long fur fiber, so we're going to toss that. So if you look at your monster's arms, there's one side that is smooth. Here, it's uninterrupted fabric, and then you've got your seam. That seam is effectively going to be his armpit. So what we want to do is find the seam and then flatten it. Squish it flat. If you've got a little bit of thread poking out, that's okay. That's what your thread snips are for. So we flatten that. And what we're going to do is we're going to very quickly whip stitch that to hold it closed, because then it gives us a nice flat surface to stitch and attach to the body. So we make sure that we've got our knot tied. I'm going to snip off the extra bit of thread. I'm going to poke it through from the inside to the outside. And looking at it right now, I kind of want a nice even line. So I'll take my thread snips. Mind your thread, don't cut your thread. And I'll just snip that and get rid of the loose fibers. Oop, haha, that happens sometimes. I cut the knot. That's okay, easy fix. See, this is what I mean. Mistakes happen when you're making handmade things, and that's all right. So now I've got a nice straight line and those two sides are flush. So I am going to go through, and that way the knot is on the inside of the fabric so you won't see it. And just whip stitch a couple of stitches to close up that arm. It won't take many, it's not a large piece. And really you're just trying to make a nice flat straight line to attach to the body. For this, I'm not even going to bother putting a knot at the end because we're going to go right into the body itself. So once you have your needle threaded and you've sewn closed the arm, now we turn our little friend on his side and we figure out where we want that arm to be. I tend to like putting them up a little high so that it looks like just after his neck, kind of right where I figure the shoulder would be. So what I'll do is I will use either my thread snips or my brush, whatever you have. And I'm going to part the fur where I want his arm to attach. Because what we're trying to do here is get that lovely fluffy long pile fur out of our way so that we get down to the backing of the fabric. So if you look there, you can see kind of the fabric backing. We want to make sure that that is what we are sewing the arm into. So I'm going to take a clip and kind of clip his fur out of the way so I can see. A lot like a hairdresser when she's cutting layers of hair. Or he. And I'm going to line that up so that part of the arm seam is in the long pile and part of it's in the short pile. The short pile is a lot easier because there's less of it to part and get out of the way. But you want to stitch in. And once you feel that you have caught the backing, if I go like this, I'm pulling and I can feel that the needle has gone through the backing of the fabric. I'm going to bring it through. And there is my first stitch. Now what I'm going to do slightly differently with these stitches is where in the past we've been stitching and pulling our stitches tight just as we go. For this, we're going to leave the stitches intentionally loose because we are going to tighten them once all the stitches are made. And I'll show you what I mean. So we've got our first stitch and it's anchored really well. I'm going to go through the backing of the arm, pull it through, minding my clips. And then again, I'm going to go behind my first stitch. I'm going to go a little further back. I'm going to go in and out, and you can see how that's through the backing of the fur. So it's solidly anchored into the plush. And I'm going to pull it up. And right now, it looks like his arm is about to fall off. Lots of loose stitches, but I promise you, once we have sewn all the way across, we're going to go back and we're going to pull each of those stitches tight, and then it will attach his arm to the rest of him and not look like he's about to lose his parts. So, a little further into the arm, pull your stitch, mind the clips, and now we're going to go after the second stitch. We're going to stitch in and out, and you've caught that little bit of fabric, and we're going to pull. And now we've got 3 stitches through. We're going to continue through the arm, up, and now you're starting to get into the long pile fur. So it's going to be a little bit trickier. Go slow, take your time. If you get frustrated and you need a break, take a step away, have a cup of tea, have a drink of water, have a snack. It's okay. You got this. You can do this. And everything will work out fine. So we stitch through again. We brush the long pile fur out of the way. In, out, and through. And you keep doing this until you get to the end of your little arm piece here. And then I'll show you how we're going to tighten up this arm. Brush your fur out of the way. This is why I say these would be super easy if you were using a non-fluffy fabric like fleece, say. But I think it's worth the extra effort. So I have gone all the way across, right to the very edge of the arm. Now what I'm going to do with either a hemostat or with your chopstick or the back end of a paintbrush, you're going to go to the beginning of your thread, the beginning of your stitches, and you're going to pull very gently. What you're trying to do is pull the thread taut instead of having it loose and baggy so that it pulls the arm into the rest of the body. Once you've tugged the first stitch tight, you're going to move on to the next one. And you're just going to go one by one, starting from the front, working your way to the back. And you can see that now the arm is tight flush up against the body. And this will be the part where it gets a little tricky because you're getting into that fluffy fur. And it's really good at obscuring your vision of each individual stitch. So just go slow, be patient. You got this. We've got 2 more stitches, it looks like so. And if your thread starts to get a little bit tangled, don't panic. Take it easy, go slow, and remember to kind of follow it back from where it originated. That will help you find where your knot is or where your tangle is. And now I'm on the last stitch, so I'll pull that tight. And now I'm going to take his hair clips out. But now you can see that we've got a nice tight stitch right up snug to his body. That arm is not going anywhere. His little floppy arms are secured, or at least this one is. And then I bet you can tell what I'm going to say here now that we're at the end of our seam. We do what we always do. We're going to poke the thread in, poke it out, 1, 2 loops, and using your hand to kind of keep the fluff out of the way, pull it tight. Make sure that's good and solidly on there. And then again, thread the needle through. You can push it out through the front. Brush a little bit to prevent your fur from getting stuck in the seam. There we go. And now we snip this thread again. Follow it down, press into the body a little bit, and snip. The end of that thread disappears into the body. You have a nice, clean, finished end. And your arm, or your monster's arm, is firmly attached. Hello. So now you're going to do the same gosh darn thing on this side. I believe in you. You can do this. Knot your thread. Line your arm up with the other arm so you get roughly the same spot. And attach your second arm. You ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, we have both arms attached. Woohoo! To our little friend. He's got both his leggies, both his floppy little ears, his face. I feel like he's missing something. Oh! His booty ornament, his tail. Can't have this little fuzzy monster without his tail. He's got nothing to wag when he's happy. How will you know? All right, so, boop, face down, friend. Sorry. Time for the butt-ectomy. So, what we're going to do is we are going to brush your glorious tail. We are going to do the same thing with this that we did with his arms because of the way it's being attached. So you're going to want to find the seam, which in this case, this back side is where it was folded. This front area is where the seam was stitched. And I'm going to trim just a tiny little bit that was sticking up. All right, so we are going to stitch right across on this, just like we did with the arms. Oop, sorry, buddy. Cut your ear with the thread. We're going to prep our thread and tie our double knot. We are going to pick a side. It really doesn't functionally matter which side, but you're going to smush those two ends together into kind of like a panini. You're going to thread your thread through with the knot tucked into the inside, and you're just going to do a couple whip stitches across to close off his tail. You're in the home stretch, friends. You're almost there. So close. You're doing so well, and I'm so proud of you. If you stuck with it this far, fantastic. If you needed a little break, that's okay too. Art is supposed to be fun. And if you're getting frustrated or it's becoming aggravating, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to put your project on the shelf and walk away from it for a little bit and come back to it when you are feeling up to trying again. Okay, so our tail is closed off. Now, I don't want to put it up here. I don't want to put it down there. Somewhere kind of right across his booty, right? So just like before, when we're trying to find our spot for the arms, I'm going to go to about where I want this. And I'm going to use, in this case, my snips, my scissors. And I'm going to brush the fur out of the way. We're going to go right to that backing, just like with the arms when we were attaching those, and you'll be able to see the backing of the fabric. So this is the point where you want to take your tail and pick which side you want to start on. It depends on, I don't know if you're left-handed, right-handed, whatever side you would like to start with. I find it easier to go right to left. So I'm going to poke my needle through and catch that backing. And with this one, I'm actually going to pull it all the way through, almost. Just so that I have enough slack to poke it through the tail again. And I'm going to pull that tight and then thread. See, this is what I mean with long pile fur being tricky. Thread it through the backing, trying to hold the fur out of the way so you guys can see what I'm doing. Pull it tight, and then thread it from bottom to top through the tail, and just keep doing that until you're all the way at the end. And then you're going to do the same thing you have done for every seam, and that is tie the knot at the end to secure it. So go ahead and stitch your way across, tie a knot at the end, and I'll see you back in a minute. Whew, and there we go. Our tail is nice and solidly attached. Our little friend is going to get a quick brushing to tidy up the fur that got mussed during the sewing process. Oh my gosh, friends, are you ready? Are you ready to see this little cutie? Oh my goodness. Your ears, little man. And there we go. There is our little monster plushie. You did it! Congratulations! So proud of you, and you should be proud of yourself. You stuck with it, and you made it all the way to the end. And now you have an adorable, soft, fluffy little friend to carry with you on your adventures. So, congratulations. I hope you all had fun. I hope even if there were some moments that were frustrating, that the end result is totally worth it. You made a thing. Good job. See, he's proud of you too. So thank you so much for joining us on this little adventure of making your own mini monster friend. And I look forward to seeing everyone for the next crafting adventure. Take care, be kind to yourself, and have a fantastic day. Bye!